Hello, friends. Before we begin, I want to ask a question as usual. Have you ever driven through the Navajo Nation after midnight, when the road stretches so long it feels like it might never end, and the headlights barely seem to touch the land ahead? Out here, the desert isn't empty. It just knows how to stay quiet. Red earth rolls into black silhouettes. Wind moves through canyons like something breathing. During the day, it's beautiful, almost peaceful. At night, that beauty turns watchful, patient, like it's waiting for you to make a mistake. If you've ever been near a place like this, you already understand why people don't like to talk about it. And if you haven't, listen closely. My name is Daniel Yazzie. I'm a Navajo Tribal Police officer, assigned to the Northern Reservation sector near the Canyon districts. I've worn the badge for 14 years. Long enough to know that out here, one officer can be responsible for over 70 square miles of land, most of it unreachable by radio, backup, or help. This job is lonely, understaffed, and dangerously quiet. I thought I understood this work. I was wrong. There are things I've learned out there, things that don't exist in any manual, weren't covered in training, and were never written into a report. And there's one place in particular where we were told to dig once and never speak about what we found. I didn't want to tell this story. Even now, saying it out loud makes my hands shake, because some things are easier to carry in silence than risk waking them again. I've worn a Navajo Tribal Police badge for 14 years, long enough to know when fear is earned. And this confession matters because I was there when the ground was opened. There was a dig site, official, sealed, and erased, that still visits me in my sleep. My chest tightens when I smell wet earth, and my knees ache as if I'm still standing there. After that unnamed incident, our department changed overnight. Radios went quiet. Paperwork grew thinner. Questions stopped being asked. If you ever carried something you weren't supposed to remember, you know how heavy it gets. Careers ended. Elders fell silent. My partner never came back the same. I'm telling this now because the signs are returning again. The signs were returning. And before I could explain why that mattered, you need to understand the land we were assigned to watch. The northern canyon sector of the Navajo Nation doesn't announce itself with signs or fences. It just opens slowly into distances that feel unfinished. Red stone drops into narrow shadows where sunlight disappears early. Wind moves differently there, sliding instead of blowing. At night, temperatures fall fast and sound carries too far. Radios crackle, then go dead. You can stand on a ridge and see nothing move for miles, yet still feel watched. That feeling never leaves, even after years of patrols and quiet drives. During the day, the canyons look almost gentle. Layers of sandstone glow copper and gold, carved by water older than memory. Tourists see postcards. Officers see terrain that eats time. Storms roll in without warning. Flooding washes that were dry minutes earlier. Summer heat cooks engines. Winter cold stiffens fingers and side gloves. There are no streetlights, no landmarks that stay the same. Roads bend, split, vanish. Beauty out here isn't comforting. It's indifferent. It reminds you how small you are, how easily something could happen without anyone noticing, without anyone coming. Every generation has learned that lesson in different ways. Long before badges and radios, people disappeared into these canyons and were never found. Stories passed quietly, warnings wrapped in respect. We were trained to separate history from procedure, myth from measurable risk. Still, the tension lingered. The land fed families, guided ceremonies, and buried the careless. When we patrolled, we weren't just enforcing law. We were guests moving through something older, something that didn't care about jurisdiction lines or modern authority. That contradiction sat heavy on every shift, even when we pretended not to feel it. Our patrol protocols reflected the reality. Never drive without a full tank. Always log entry times. Call them before crossing certain ridges. If your radio drops, you turn back. If weather shifts, you leave early. Backup could be over an hour away, sometimes more. One officer might cover 70 square miles alone, responding to livestock disputes, domestic calls, accidents, missing persons. We learn to rely on ourselves, on observation, on instinct. You memorize landmarks because GPS failed. You learn silence because shouting wasted breath. These weren't written rules. They were habits passed down quietly between shifts. There was one area, though, where habits changed. A stretch of canyon locals avoided without explanation. No calls originated there. No one reported crimes, accidents, or lost animals inside its boundaries. When dispatch maps highlighted it, the screen looked normal, but names were missing. Older officers slowed when driving near it. Some wouldn't stop at all. We joked at first, calling it superstition, blaming old stories meant to scare kids into staying close to home. It was easier to laugh than ask why elders cross a road rather than walk near that place. When elders did speak, they chose their words carefully. They didn't say danger. They said balance. They didn't say monsters. They said consequences. We listened politely, then filed away under cultural sensitivity, the same category as ghost stories and warnings about whistling at night. Training taught us to respect beliefs without letting them interfere with enforcement. Still, I noticed how voices lowered when that canyon came up, how eyes shifted away from the horizon. Fear doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet agreement to avoid a place entirely. Most officers learn where not to linger. It's an unspoken rule everywhere, not just here. A certain alley, a stretch of highway, a patch of woods where your gut tightens for no clear reason. In this sector, that feeling sharpened near the restricted canyon. Time seemed thicker there. A 5-minute drive felt longer. Sunsets dropped faster. Even the air felt heavier, pressing against your chest. I caught myself checking mirrors more often, adjusting my seat, waiting for something to justify the unease. Nothing ever did, which somehow made it worse. Maps said the canyon was straightforward. A single access road, a branching wash, a dead end. I drove enough times to memorize every turn, yet occasionally the mileage didn't add up. Landmarks appeared earlier or later than expected. A bend in the road seemed tighter one night, wider the next. I blamed fatigue, bad light, faulty memory. But other officers mentioned it too, always casually, never officially. Reports stayed clean. No one wanted to sound confused about terrain. We were sworn to know. Confusion felt like weakness in a place that punished hesitation. Weather amplified everything. Rain turned dust into slick clay that pulled tires sideways. Fog rolled low through the canyon, swallowing headlights. During storms, the radio static sounded almost like voices, overlapping and indistinct. Dispatch insisted nothing was wrong. Signal loss was normal. We accepted that answer because it fit policy. Still, I started logging extra details in my notebook. Things that didn't fit anywhere else. Sounds, smells, the way animals avoided certain ridges, the way silence deepened near the restricted zone, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Isolation changes how you think. Hours alone in a cruiser leave room for thoughts you'd normally dismiss. You replay calls. You imagine scenarios. You listen too closely. I told myself the canyon was just land, shaped by erosion and weather, nothing more. Yet every time I crossed an invisible boundary near that zone, my body reacted before my mind did. Heart rate up, jaw tight, hands sweating on the wheel. Training said remain objective. Experience said trust your instincts. The conflict between those two rules grew sharper with every uneventful patrol through that area. The first time I noticed something truly wrong, it wasn't dramatic. My GPS showed me stationary while the scenery moved. The compass needle spun once, then settled facing south when I knew I was heading west. I stopped the vehicle, stepped out and listened. No wind, no birds, just the pressure behind my ears, like descending too fast. It passed quickly. Equipment malfunction, I told myself. Later, reviewing the log, the timestamps didn't line up. Minutes were missing. I closed the notebook and didn't mention to anyone. By the time the signs returned, avoidance had become routine. Calls near that canyon were reassigned or delayed. Elders stopped attending community meetings altogether. Officers exchanged looks instead of words. The land hadn't changed, but our behavior had, quietly, collectively. Whatever lay at the center of that restricted zone had already begun shaping us. long before any official action was taken. We just didn't know its name yet. That came later, with a call that broke protocol, forced our hand, and led us straight to the place everyone pretended wasn't there. The call came 2 nights after I admitted to myself that the canyon was changing us. Dispatch crackled to life just after dusk, the kind of hour when shadows settle in and radios start misbehaving. At first, it sounded like interference, bursts of static, half words, breathing too close to the mic. The dispatcher repeated the location twice, then paused, confused, because the coordinates didn't resolve to anything on the map. I remember her voice tightening, professionalism strained by uncertainty. Calls are supposed to be clear. This one wasn't. When the transmission came through again, it wasn't any cleaner. A male voice, older, speaking Navajo between gasps, then switching to English as if searching for the right language to be understood. He kept repeating a marker that didn't exist anymore, a place name removed from official charts years ago. Dispatch asked for clarification. The response dissolved into static. Then the line went dead. We stared at the map, watching a blinking cursor hover over empty space, unsure whether to log as a malfunction or a call for help. Protocol says you treat uncertainty as risk. I acknowledged the call and headed out alone. Backup was stretched thin, covering a rollover miles away. As I drove, dispatch tried reestablishing contact. Each attempt came back fragmented, the signal slipping like water through fingers. The coordinates shifted slightly every time, jumping east, then west, never settling. It felt less like bad equipment, and more like something refusing to be pinned down. I didn't say that out loud. I said copy and kept driving. The first thing I found wasn't a person. It was livestock. 3 sheep, scattered along the wash, alive but trembling, eyes wide, refusing to move. No signs of predators. No blood. Their tracks stopped abruptly, as if they'd been set down from above. I called it in. Dispatch asked for confirmation of location. I gave it, then watched the GPS redraw my position 10 yards away from where I was standing. The canyon walls loomed closer than they should have, their shadows swallowing the last of the light. We filed it as a livestock incident. Unusual but explainable. That would have been the end of it, if not for the second call. It came the next morning, clearer but worse. A family reported an elder missing. His name was Thomas Begay, a respected community member, known for mentoring trainees and mediating disputes before they reached our desks. He'd gone out before dawn to check his sheep near the restricted canyon and hadn't returned. His truck was found parked where the access road faded into rock. The engine was cold. The door was open. Thomas wasn't careless. He knew the land better than most officers did. He taught us where washes flooded, where tires sank, where not to linger. Losing him felt wrong in a way that bypassed logic. We organized a search, small and controlled. No helicopters. No outside agencies. The order came down quietly. Resolve it quickly. Keep it local. Families didn't need panic. Media didn't need stories. The canyon didn't need attention. Those were the words used, almost verbatim. As we searched, details refused to line up. Tracks appeared, then vanished. Boot prints led into solid rock. Radio chatter echoed back seconds late, our own voices distorted. A trainee with less than a year on the force froze when he heard his name called from the canyon wall, spoken in Thomas's voice. We pulled him back, told him stress does strange things. He nodded, but his hands shook for hours afterward. No one laughed this time. We found Thomas's hat near the wash, neatly placed on a stone. No signs of struggle, no signs of a fall. His footprints circled the area once, twice, then ended. It was as if he'd stepped out of the world. Evidence bags stayed empty. Cameras recorded nothing useful. Reports grew thinner, language vaguer. Unable to determine, no further leads. I felt the pressure build, unspoken but heavy. Find him or stop digging. Whispers started among the older officers. Not rumors, warnings. This wasn't a disappearance, they said. It was a return. Something that had been put away was stirring again. I asked what they meant. They told me to focus on the search. Elders stopped answering calls. Family members asked questions we couldn't answer. Each night, The canyon seemed closer, the dark thicker. Sleep came in fragments. On the third day, command shut the search down. Officially, resources were needed elsewhere. Unofficially, we were told to let it rest. Thomas Begay was listed as missing, presumed lost to the land. His family was given condolences, not explanations. The trainee transferred out within a month. I stayed, carrying the weight of unfinished business. We hadn't lost Thomas. He hadn't wandered off. Something had taken him, or something he knew had called him back. It wasn't until weeks later, reviewing old files I wasn't supposed to access, that I saw the pattern. Previous reports, redacted and forgotten, clustered around the same canyon. Always livestock first. Always a man after. Always silence. Whatever lay beneath that place wasn't new. It was buried. And now, for reasons none of us understood, it was demanding to be acknowledged again. The pattern I found in those old files should have sent everything into motion. Instead, it did the opposite. Within 48 hours of my quiet requests and unanswered questions, the investigation stopped being ours. Orders came down without ceremony, not through email or briefing, but in person, delivered by people who didn't usually set foot in our station. Federal representatives arrived alongside tribal officials I'd never seen before, their badges unfamiliar, their expressions carefully neutral. No one explained why they were there. They didn't need to. The shift in authority was immediate, heavy, and absolute. We were told it would be a dig. Not a search, not an excavation, just a dig. The location was a restricted canyon, marked with a red circle on a printed map, not the digital system we normally used. No coordinates were read aloud. No timeline was offered. Questions were met with steady eye contact and silence. The order was framed as routine cooperation between agencies, yet nothing about it felt routine. There would be no press, no public notice, no reports beyond a single internal reference number. Whatever we uncovered, we were told, would not exist on paper. Equipment arrived that afternoon, hauled in on flatbeds that left deep ruts in the dirt road. It wasn't the kind of gear used for recovery operations or infrastructure projects. The machines were older, reinforced, modified in ways I couldn't place. Thick cables. Containment units sealed with warning labels I didn't recognize. Portable generators that hummed at a pitch that made my teeth ache. Men unloaded them without speaking, moving with practiced efficiency, as if they'd done this before somewhere else. I watched from my cruiser, feeling less like an officer and more like a bystander. Before we were allowed anywhere near the site, we were sworn to silence. Not the standard confidentiality agreement, but a verbal warning delivered face-to-face. We were told that discussing the dig outside this perimeter would be considered a violation of tribal and federal law, punishable by termination and prosecution. No reason was given. No endpoint defined. Just silence, indefinite and enforced. I remember nodding along with everyone else, my badge suddenly feeling lighter, less meaningful, as if authority had shifted away from us entirely. The conflict settled in my chest like a stone. Duty told me to follow orders, protect the chain of command, trust that someone higher up understood what was happening. Instinct screamed that we were making a mistake, that whatever lay beneath that canyon didn't want attention, didn't want disturbance. I thought of Thomas Begay, of the way his footprints ended, of the elders who had warned us in careful, indirect language. For the first time in my career, obedience felt like betrayal. Not of policy, but of the land itself. Elders withdrew completely once the dig began. Calls went unanswered. Doors stayed closed. The community seemed to shrink inward, as if bracing for impact. Even those who had never spoken of the canyon avoided the area, choosing longer routes, keeping children close. Animals reacted first. Horses refused to drink from nearby troughs. Dogs whined and pulled at their leashes. Birds disappeared entirely, leaving the sky above the site empty and wrong. The absence was louder than any noise. As the machines bit into the earth, the land reacted in ways I'd never seen. The ground trembled, not violently, but persistently, like a low fever. Wind rose and fell without pattern, circling the canyon walls instead of passing through. Sounds bent oddly, engines echoing where they shouldn't, voices carrying too far, or not at all. Radios malfunctioned within minutes, draining batteries faster than physics allowed. One of the federal technicians shut his unit off entirely and taped over a speaker, his hands shaking. I stood at the edge of the perimeter, watching dirt lifted and set aside with clinical precision. No one joked. No one smoked. The air smelled metallic, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. When the shovel struck something solid, the machine stalled, its engine whining in protest. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then the generators surged, lights flickered, and a pressure rolled outward from the pit, forcing me to take a step back. My heart hammered, as if I'd been running. They uncovered something that wasn't rock. Not bone, not metal, not anything I could name from training or experience. It was dark, matte, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The shape resisted definition, edges shifting when you try to focus on them. A technician swore softly and crossed himself. Another turned away, retching. No one took photos. No one measured it. The order came quickly. Stop digging, secure the site, begin containment. Whatever it wasn't meant to be exposed. As they worked, I felt a strange sensation like being recognized. My ears rang. My vision narrowed. Memories surfaced uninvited, driving that canyon road at night. The way time slipped, the missing minutes. It felt connected, not just to the land, but to us, to every story filed away and forgotten. This wasn't an artifact we'd found. It was something we'd disturbed, something that had been waiting, patient beneath layers of earth and silence. By nightfall, the pit was sealed again, covered with fresh soil and marked with nothing but a blank stretch of ground. Equipment was packed up as quickly as it had arrived. The men left without farewells. We were told the operation was complete. No further action required. No follow-up. The canyon returned to its quiet, but was a different quiet now, strained and watchful. I drove home with my windows down, trying to shake the feeling that the land was listening. Sleep didn't come that night. When it did, it was shallow and crowded with images I couldn't quite remember upon waking. In the days that followed, subtle changes crept in. Animals avoided the area even more aggressively. Weather patterns shifted. Storms skirting the canyon, as if pushed aside. Officers reported headaches, nosebleeds, lost time. None of it was documented. We'd been warned. Silence held. Yet something had changed. Whatever was buried had been acknowledged, disturbed, then forced back into the dark. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the canyon seemed closer now, its presence pressing against the edges of every patrol. The dig hadn't resolved anything. It had drawn a line, established rules we didn't yet understand. And soon, those rules would start revealing themselves, whether we were ready or not. By the time dawn broke after the dig, the official story was already forming. Even though none of us had been asked what we saw, that alone told me everything about how this was going to end. Still, before it disappeared into sealed files and rewritten reports, I need to explain what we unearthed, or as close as I can come without lying to you or myself. I'll say this the way I would in a report, because that's the only way I know how to keep my voice steady. The dig site was located approximately 100 yards inside the restricted canyon boundary. Soil composition was consistent with the surrounding area. Compacted red clay, sandstone fragments, mineral-heavy sediment. Depth at first contact was just under 8 feet. No underground utilities. No known archaeological markers. Nothing that should have stopped that machine the way it did. When the bucket hit resistance, the sound was wrong. Not the crack of stone or the dull thud of buried debris, but something softer and heavier at the same time, like striking dense rubber wrapped in wet cloth. The operator killed the engine immediately. That wasn't procedure. That was instinct. We approached on foot. No one rushed. No one spoke. The air carried a smell that didn't belong to desert. Damp, coppery, with an undertone like old smoke trapped in fabric. It caught in the back of my throat and stayed there. I remember thinking it smelled alive without smelling organic, if that makes any sense at all. What was exposed and resolved into a clear object. Every time I tried to define it, length, width, orientation, my eyes slid away from the details. The surface was dark, but not black. Matte, but not dull. It absorbed light in a way that made the surrounding dirt seem too bright by comparison. Edges curved where they shouldn't, not sharply, not smoothly, just incorrectly. I wrote later that it was irregular. That word still feels like a lie. One of the officers, a man with over 20 years on the force, stepped closer than he should have. He crouched, reached out with a gloved hand, and froze inches away from it. His breathing changed. Shallow fast. Then he screamed once, sharp and uncontrolled, and struck it with the butt of his flashlight. The impact echoed like it came from inside my own chest. He didn't hit it again. He dropped the flashlight, backed away, and started yelling that it was breathing, that it moved when he wasn't looking straight at it. 2 others restrained him as he fought, not in panic but in rage, as if whatever lay in that pit had personally insulted him. We pulled him back to the perimeter. He kept pointing, swearing it had leaned toward him. No one corrected him. No one reassured him. Another officer stood on the opposite side of the pit, hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white beneath the dust. He refused to look down. Flatly, when asked to assist with measurements, he shook his head and said, "If I see it, it'll see me." He stayed that way the entire time, staring at the canyon wall, whispering under his breath in Navajo. I didn't ask what he was saying. I didn't want to know. As for me, I did look. I wish I hadn't, but I did. And the moment I focused on it, really focused, I felt a sensation I can't put into policy language. Recognition isn't the right word, but it's the closest I have. It was like standing in front of someone who knew you intimately, without ever having met you, like being remembered by something you've forgotten. My ears rang, not from noise, but from pressure, as if the air itself had thickened around my head. For a brief, terrifying second, I had the overwhelming certainty that if I stepped closer, I wouldn't be stepping forward. I would be stepping back into something already prepared for me. That was when the order came down to shut everything down. No debate, no discussion. A single word, enough. Containment units were brought forward. I didn't see what methods were used, and I don't think that was an accident. Tarps went up. Personnel were rotated away from the pit in pairs, then reassigned to perimeter duty. The object, whatever it was never fully exposed again. Soil was returned, compacted, smoothed, erased. Within hours, the site looked untouched. The officer who had struck it was escorted off-site and never returned to duty. Officially, it was a medical leave. Unofficially, his name stopped being spoken. The one who refused will transfer within weeks, citing personal reasons. I understood him better than I wanted to. Every piece of equipment that had come into contact with the pit was removed. Gloves burned, tools sealed, vehicles power washed until the runoff ran red, then clear. Evidence logs were created, then amended, then replaced entirely. The reference number assigned to the operation now pointed to a blank entry, a clerical error. If anyone ever noticed, reports were rewritten carefully. Language softened, details blurred. Unidentified subsurface anomaly became natural geological formation. Reactions were attributed to stress, dehydration, exhaustion. The smell was never mentioned. The resistance was explained away as compacted stone. The shutdown was framed as precautionary, nothing more. I signed my name at the bottom of a document that didn't match what I remembered. My hand hesitated just long enough for the supervising agent to notice. He didn't threaten me. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "This is how people stay employed." That night, I dreamed of the canyon without ever seeing it. I dreamed of standing still while something moved closer without taking a step. I woke up with the taste of metal in my mouth and dirt under my fingernails, even though I'd scrubbed my hands raw before bed. In the weeks that followed, the official line held. Nothing was found. Nothing happened. Life returned to routine on paper. But out on patrol, things were different. Radios picked up echoes of conversations we hadn't had yet. Distances felt wrong. Officers avoided the canyon, without needing to be told. The land itself seemed aware in a way that made my skin crawl. Whatever we unearthed wasn't an object to be cataloged or destroyed. It wasn't evidence. It was a presence, something that had been put there deliberately, then buried under layers of silence and policy. Digging it up hadn't solved a mystery. It had reminded it we were still here. And in the days that followed, new rules began circulating, quietly, unofficially. Rules that no one admitted to writing, but everyone understood they had to follow if we wanted to survive what we just disturbed. The rules didn't arrive all at once, and they were never written down where anyone could point to them later. They spread the way habits do, passed quietly between shifts, learned through tone and omission rather than instruction. After the dig, no memo went out explaining changes. Yet everyone seemed to know something fundamental had shifted. Patrol patterns altered. Dispatch phrasing softened. Certain places on the map became blank without ever being erased. The first rule was simple. You didn't go back there unless you had to. The restricted canyon wasn't marked with tape or signs. No barriers were erected. On paper, it remained accessible. In practice, it became untouchable. Calls near it were rerouted, delayed, or downgraded. GPS overlays dimmed slightly when you passed its boundary. Not enough to notice consciously, but enough that you hesitated before proceeding. No one announced a restriction. We enforced it anyway. The second rule followed naturally. No officer responded alone anymore, not anywhere near that sector. If backup was unavailable, the call waited. If waiting wasn't possible, supervisors made the call themselves. We told civilians it was a staffing issue, a safety measure. We didn't tell them the truth, that isolation had started feeling dangerous in a way body armor couldn't fix. 2 sets of eyes were better than one. 2 voices to confirm what was real. Certain radio codes vanished from use. Not officially retired, just avoided. Codes associated with location checks, welfare calls, and lost time stopped appearing in logs. Dispatchers hesitated before signing them, then chose alternatives. When asked, they shrugged and blamed updated guidelines. No one pushed. We all remembered the static, the voices slipping through, the way radios drained themselves near the canyon. Silence became another protocol. That was when the mimicry started. At first, it was subtle. Dispatch would call an officer by the wrong name, then correct themselves quickly, embarrassed. A familiar voice would come over the radio, asking a question that didn't quite fit the situation. Once, I heard my own name spoken from a channel I wasn't monitoring, followed by a burst of static that made my head throb. Dispatch insisted it was interference. I believed them because the alternative was worse. Then it escalated. Officers reported hearing family members' voices on open channels, asking for help, giving directions that didn't exist. One patrol unit responded to a call cleared hours earlier because the address was repeated in a voice he trusted. He arrived to find nothing but empty road and a feeling he couldn't shake for days. We wrote it up as stress. We always wrote it up as stress. Enforcing the new rules created a moral, not I still haven't untangled. We were telling people no. No assistance, no entry, no explanation. Without justification we could share. Elders asked why access roads were suddenly unsafe. Ranchers wanted to know why we wouldn't escort them into areas they'd used all their lives. I stood there, badge on my chest, offering vague answers that felt like lies. Each time, I wondered whether protecting them from the truth was kinder than telling them something I didn't fully understand myself. The land didn't let us forget. Animals continued to avoid the canyon, skirting its edges like it radiated heat. Sounds traveled oddly, laughter echoing too long, footsteps cutting off abruptly. Officers reported seeing movement just outside their headlights, always gone when they focused. The rules adapted again. Don't follow voices. Don't acknowledge names unless confirmed visually. If your partner says they heard something you didn't, you both leave. These protocols weren't taught. They were survived into existence. I caught myself enforcing them instinctively one night when a call came in from near the restricted zone. A woman's voice, calm but strained, asking for help. Dispatch flagged the signal as unstable. I felt the pull to respond, to do what the badge demanded. Instead, I requested confirmation, backup, verification through secondary channels. The voice repeated my name, mispronounced just enough to be wrong. I shut the radio off and sat in the dark until the call dropped. I hated myself for the relief that followed. We started warning new officers without explaining why. Don't go there alone. Trust your partner over the radio. If something feels off, leave. They nodded, thinking it was standard caution. I watched their confidence slowly erode as they noticed the same inconsistencies we had. I wonder how long before one of them broke a rule out of ignorance, not defiance. The rules kept us functioning, but they didn't fix anything. They were a stopgap, a way to coexist with something we disturbed and couldn't undo. Each shift felt like walking a line drawn in sand, knowing it could wash away at any moment. And beneath it all was the unspoken fear that the rules weren't enough, that whatever we'd unearthed was learning them too. When the first rule was broken, it wasn't dramatic. It was just another call, another decision made under pressure, and it set into motion consequences none of us were prepared to face. The first rule was broken on a night I wasn't supposed to be working with him. My partner's name was Aaron Begay, no relation to Thomas, though the coincidence never stopped feeling cruel. Aaron and I had worked the same sector for nearly 6 years. He was steady, methodical, the kind of officer who double-checked reports and never raised his voice on a call. If there was someone I trusted to follow the new rules, it was him. That night, staffing was thin. Dispatch rerouted a welfare check near the edge of the restricted canyon. Backup was tied up. The rule said wait. The badge said respond. Aaron chose the badge. I found out an hour later. When I reached him, his cruiser was parked crookedly near the wash, headlights on, engine running. He was sitting inside with both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. He didn't acknowledge me until I opened the door and said his name. Even then, it took a moment for him to turn, like he had to remember how. He told me he'd heard someone calling from the canyon, not over the radio. Out there, a voice that sounded familiar, but wrong. He said it knew his name before he said it. I reminded him of the rules, tried to keep my tone light. He nodded, said he knew, said it wouldn't happen again. But the way he said it, flat, detached, made my stomach sink. From that night on, Aaron didn't leave the same. At first, the changes were small. He started keeping his radio volume low, almost muted. He stopped joking during patrols. He'd pause mid-sentence, listening to something I couldn't hear. Once, while we were parked overlooking the canyon, he asked me if I could feel it paying attention. I laughed it off, told him lack of sleep messes with perception. He didn't smile. He began avoiding eye contact with the land itself, keeping his gaze fixed on the road or the dashboard. When I asked why, he said, "It listens when you look too long." I told him the canyon wasn't alive. He didn't argue. He just said, "That's what it wants you to think." Silence followed him home. His wife called me twice over the next month. She asked if something had happened on shift, if I'd noticed him drinking more, sleeping less. I told her what I could, that work had been stressful, that we were stretched thin. I didn't tell her about the dig. I didn't tell her about the voices. I didn't tell her that sometimes, when Aaron spoke, it sounded like he was choosing words carefully so something else wouldn't hear. He stopped bringing lunch to work. Coffee replaced meals. Then coffee was replaced with alcohol, hidden in his locker, his trunk, anywhere he thought he could control it. He said it helped quiet things. When I asked what things, he shook his head and said it wasn't safe to say out loud. The department noticed. Performance reviews dipped. Reports came back incomplete. A supervisor pulled me aside and asked if Aaron was okay. I said he was dealing with personal issues. That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. I told myself protecting him was the right thing to do. I tell myself that still. One night, he asked me to promise something. We were parked on a ridge, the canyon spread out below us like a dark wound in the earth. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He said if he ever went quiet on the radio, if he ever started saying things that didn't make sense, I was to leave, no matter what he said, no matter whose voice it sounded like. I asked him why he was talking like that. He finally met my eyes. "It practices," he said, "with us." I didn't sleep that night. A week later, Aaron requested reassignment. No explanation. No argument. He said the sector wasn't good for his family. The request was approved faster than I'd ever seen. On his last shift, he handed in his keys without ceremony. He looked lighter, like leaving had loosened something inside him. I wanted to believe that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 months after he left the force, I got a call from his wife. Aaron had gone back to the canyon alone. He said he needed to put something back. His truck was found near the old access road. No note, no struggle, just tire tracks leading in and none leading out. Search efforts were brief and careful. You already know how that ends. The official report said exposure, disorientation, probable fall. The canyon claimed another man, and the paperwork moved on. His wife didn't. She asked me questions I couldn't answer. I attended the funeral in uniform, standing at the back, feeling like a fraud. Every eulogy spoke of his dedication, his kindness, his love for the land. No one mentioned how afraid he'd been at the end. I carry that with me. The knowledge that I watched him fade and didn't stop it, that I chose silence over intervention. If you've ever watched someone fade right in front of you, watched the light dim while you told yourself it was temporary, you know how that guilt settles in your bones. After Aaron, the rules hardened. No exceptions. No lone responses. No listening to voices you couldn't see. The canyon took one of our own, and we adjusted the way organizations always do. Quietly, efficiently, as if adaptation could undo damage. But sometimes late at night, I still hear his voice on the radio, clear as day, calling my name from a channel that isn't active. And every time, I remember his promise, the one I made him swear me into. I turn the radio off, because I know what happens when you answer. Years pass without ceremony, the way they always do when nothing explodes and no one confesses. Officers rotated in and out. Supervisors retired. The restricted canyon stayed quiet enough that newer recruits treated it like an odd footnote rather than a wound. I stayed. I watched policy manuals update, while the unofficial rules lived on only in memory, carried by fewer of us each year. Silence worked, until it didn't. The first sign of its return was small. A call logged from a location that didn't exist anymore, flagged and dismissed as a system error. Then livestock again, scattered near the same wash, alive and uninjured, refusing to move. A new officer joked about predators. I didn't laugh. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since Aaron. Patterns don't announce themselves. They repeat. Within months, the disturbances align too neatly to ignore. Same canyon. Same distances off by minutes. Same radio static swallowing words at the edges. New officers responded the way they were trained to respond. Alone, confident. Unaware why the rest of us exchanged looks when certain addresses came up. The rules hadn't been written down. They couldn't be taught properly. I realized then that the day hadn't contained anything. It had only taught it how long to wait. I tried to intervene where I could, framing warnings as experience rather than fear. Don't linger. Confirm visually. Trust your partner. Some listened. Others smiled politely and did what procedure demanded. Watching them felt like watching history repeat with the names changed. I started logging anomalies again, a habit I'd never quite broken. Missing minutes. Shifting landmarks. A sunrise arrived too fast, as if the night had been shortened without permission. Time began to feel unreliable near the canyon. Patrols that should have taken 20 minutes stretched into 40 without explanation. Other nights, hours disappeared, ending with officers parked where they didn't remember driving. We blamed fatigue. We always did. But the land felt closer, its edges pressing inward, reclaiming attention we denied it for years. The undeniable encounter happened on a routine shift, which somehow made it worse. I was riding with a newer officer, fresh out of field training, confident in the way only inexperience allows. Dispatch assigned us a noise complaint near the canyon boundary. Harmless, familiar. I hesitated, then went anyway. The road looked the same until it didn't. A bend appeared earlier than expected. The stars felt lower, brighter, crowding the windshield. We stopped when the radio cut out completely. That silence wasn't empty. It was full, dense, like standing underwater. I felt it before I saw anything. A pressure behind my eyes, a sense of being addressed without sound. My partner stepped out, calling my name. His voice echoed back wrong, delayed, layered. I grabbed his arm and told him to get back in the vehicle. That was when something moved at the edge of the headlights. It didn't emerge. It didn't approach. It adjusted, like it was aligning itself with our perspective. The shape refused focus, but its presence was undeniable, occupying space that hadn't been empty a moment before. The air smelled of wet earth and old metal. My partner whispered that someone was standing there. I told him not to look directly. I don't know how I knew to say that. I just did. For a heartbeat too long, it felt aware of us. Not curious, not hostile, acknowledging. Then the radio burst back to life, loud and distorted, calling a name that wasn't ours. We drove. Tires spun. Distance warped. The canyon fell away behind us faster than physics allowed. When we stopped, both of us were shaking. We filed no report. After that night, the signs multiplied. Voices on dispatch. Names misused. Elders avoiding roads they'd walked all their lives. I knew then, with a certainty that settled deep, that whatever we'd unearthed had never been the problem. We had been, and the land was done waiting. By the time the truth finally forced itself to the surface, I understood why the elders had never named what lay beneath the canyon. Naming gives shape. Shape invites challenge. And whatever waited there had never needed force to win. It began with recognition. Another series of calls came in over the span of 3 nights, each one closer to the restricted zone than the last. Same distortions. Same impossible coordinates. Same feeling of being nudged rather than summoned. Supervisors hesitated, then looked to me. I was one of the few left who remembered what had been buried, even if I still couldn't define it. When they asked what we should do, I realized how heavy that responsibility had become. We returned to Canyon at dawn, not as an operation, but as a concession. No machines this time. No federal observers. Just us, a handful of officers, and 2 elders who finally agreed to come with us after years of silence. They didn't bring tools. They brought offerings. Cornmeal, tobacco, water, things meant for listening, not digging. The land reacted before we reached the old site. Wind rose against the direction of our approach, pressing back as if testing resolve. Radios failed in unison. Vehicles stalled and were abandoned without panic. We walked the rest of the way, the canyon walls narrowing as though the path itself was being reconsidered. When we reached the place where the dig had been sealed, there were no markers. There never had been. Yet every one of us knew we'd arrived. The air was heavier there, thicker, carrying that same metallic scent that never quite left my memory. The elders stopped first. One of them knelt, pressed his palm to the ground, and closed his eyes. He remembers, she said quietly. No one asked who. The confrontation wasn't dramatic. There was no eruption, no sudden violence. The ground didn't open. Instead, the space around us shifted subtly, like a breath taken too deep. Sound dulled. Distance folded inward. When I stepped forward, the ground felt warmer beneath my boots, almost responsive, as if aware of weight and intention. I felt it again then, that sense of being known. Not studied, not hunted, recognized. As if the land itself was acknowledging an old mistake. One of the younger officers reached for his weapon out of instinct. An elder caught his wrist gently and shook her head. It doesn't answer to that, she said. It answers to memory. That was when the warnings finally made sense. This place wasn't cursed. It wasn't evil. It was a boundary. Something put in the ground long ago to hold a line that wasn't meant to be crossed. The elder stories hadn't been about fear. They'd been about responsibility, about what happens when balance is treated like superstition and containment like ignorance. The dig had been a violation, not because we uncovered something dangerous, but because we treated it like an object instead of an agreement. As the elder spoke, the canyon responded, not with words, but with pressure and presence. The air vibrated faintly, just enough to be felt through bone. I realized then that force had never been its language. Attention was. Recognition. We hadn't awakened it by digging. We'd awakened it by remembering it existed. I thought of Aaron, of Thomas, of all the names erased quietly from reports. They hadn't been taken at random. They'd been called back by something that remembered them, something that believed the agreement was broken and needed to be restored. The elders finished their offerings in silence. When they stepped back, the pressure eased slightly, like a hand withdrawing after making a point. The land didn't forgive us. It acknowledged us. That felt worse somehow. That was when the choice became unavoidable. We could expose this, bring in experts, scientists, media, force the truth into daylight, and hope understanding followed. Or we could contain it again, not with machines and silence, but with memory and restraint. Reinforce the boundary instead of challenging it. I felt the moral weight settle fully then. Exposing the truth might save future lives, but it would also invite endless intrusion. Containment would preserve balance, but at the cost of continued secrecy, continued loss when rules were broken by those who didn't know them. I looked at the elders. They looked back without judgment. This had never been their decision to make alone. It had become ours when we dug. In the end, we chose containment. No announcements, no investigations, just a return to older rules, reinforced quietly, carried forward by those willing to remember. The elders taught us what they could, enough to restore the agreement, not enough to name it fully. The land receded, the pressure lifting until the canyon felt like a place again instead of a presence. As we left, I knew this wasn't resolution. It was postponement. A fragile balance rebuilt by acknowledgement rather than control. The cost of that choice would linger, paid slowly, unevenly, by those who forgot or refused to listen. Driving away, I felt the canyon watching, not in anger, but in expectation. And I understood then that the real danger wasn't what lay buried beneath us. It was what would happen when someone decided, again, that silence was ignorance, and that some things were safer dragged into the light than left where they were placed. The reports came out the week after the canyon visit, sleek and sterile, as if nothing had ever happened. Page after page, the incident was reframed as a minor soil displacement during routine fieldwork, with temporary anomalies in communication equipment. Nothing about the animals, nothing about the voices, nothing about what had actually been unearthed. No mention of the pressure, the recognition, the presence that had refused force yet observed everything. On paper, the operation was professional, precise, and harmless. Careers shifted quietly. Officers who had questioned protocol or hesitated under duress were reassigned, moved to districts far from the canyon, their experience valued but separated from the site. Those who'd been closest to the entity, the ones who had seen too much, were quietly encouraged to take leave, retire early, or pursue administrative duties. Nobody challenged a redirection. The unspoken message was clear. Knowledge is dangerous. Compliance preserves life. Questions invite consequences. The area remained restricted, more rigorously now. Physical barriers were still minimal, signs non-existent. Maps showed nothing but empty land. The GPS overlays were subtly manipulated, blanking specific coordinates when the canyon's edge was approached. New officers were briefed vaguely on terrain hazards and unreliable signals, told to follow protocol and never enter alone. The rules lived, but only in practice. I returned to my patrols carrying knowledge alone. No one spoke about what we'd witnessed, and even those who had been present conformed to silence. Conversations were clipped, reports sanitized. The canyon remained a presence in my mind, a weight pressing at the edges of sleep, a quiet authority that reminded me nightly of the line we'd crossed. Sleep became unreliable. Dreams were shallow and fragmented, sometimes occupied by the canyon's shadows or by voices that slipped into my memory from the radio. I woke gasping, imagining figures that weren't there, footsteps echoing behind doors that should have been empty. Coffee replaced dinner. Late-night patrols became my routine, the hum of the cruiser and the crackle of the radio, my only constants. Emotional numbness grew alongside the canyon's quiet influence. Isolation followed naturally. I stopped visiting friends. Phone calls went unanswered. Family gatherings were avoided, justified as were commitments. But I carried the truth with me like a stone in my chest. Authority had once meant clarity and confidence. Now it was a voice that cracked under the weight of what I knew, sometimes trembling mid-report when recalling coordinates or giving instructions. I had to hide the tremor, mask the doubt, or risk exposure. At times, the canyon seemed to watch through my memory, pressing silently against the edges of perception. Every patrol, every report, every routine check became a reminder that what was contained beneath the soil had never truly left. The land's authority lingered, not through intimidation, but through the persistent certainty that it would not forgive ignorance. Even the simplest administrative decisions felt impossible. Assigning officers, scheduling shifts, reviewing logs, all carried the unseen weight of unspoken rules. I knew that any misstep could echo beyond protocol, touching the balance that had been painstakingly restored by elders and by those of us who survived the dig. Authority was no longer a badge or title. It was a fragile, trembling line between action and consequence, maintained silently in every choice I made. I lived with the knowledge that reports, no matter how official, would never capture the truth, that the canyon, the presence beneath it, and the consequences of our actions existed outside documentation, beyond accountability. I had authority on paper, but it no longer meant protection. It meant vigilance, solitude, and the constant awareness that the land remembers everything. Some nights, alone in my cruiser, I would hear the faintest echo over the radio. A name, a phrase, a sound that belonged neither to me nor to anyone I knew, but felt intimately familiar. My hand would hover over the mic, and I would restrain it, because I knew that responding, even in jest, would break a boundary I could never repair. My authority voice, once steady and commanding, now quavered when I spoke, even when the words were procedural or mundane. The canyon remained, the entity remained, the rules remained, and I remained too, alone, accountable to knowledge that no report would ever justify, weighed down by memory, by loss, by the gnawing awareness that everything we contain could surface again if someone careless or curious crossed the invisible line. I've spent years trying to reconcile what I know with what I can say. You're not supposed to hear this. Not directly. Not in a way that would make it real. But here it is, and if you're listening, it means the line between safe distance and awareness has blurred just enough that you need to understand boundaries, not answers. The canyon still exists. Its walls, quiet and empty to the untrained eye, hold memory and intention. Distances warp there. Time slips. Radios misbehave. Shadows appear where there should be light. The land reacts to recognition, to attention, to mistakes made long before you arrived. It doesn't need force. It responds to acknowledgement. That is all you need to know to survive. If you are lucky, you could stumble upon it. Driving at night, following a road that doesn't seem to lead anywhere, responding to a call you weren't meant to take. You might hear your name, not over a phone, not from a person, but from a place that shouldn't speak, in a voice you trust just enough to question. If that happens, do not approach. Do not respond. Step away quietly. Leave. Everything I've learned has taught me that recognition is engagement, and engagement has consequences. The truth I carry isn't something you can verify. There are no cameras, no logs, no witnesses who can speak without risking more than employment. The reports have been rewritten. Official explanations sanitized. The land's memory reinforced by silence. All that remains are whispers among those who've seen, who remember, who carry the rules because the consequences of ignorance are too high to gamble with. And those rules, they aren't simple. Don't go alone. Don't follow voices. Leave when something seems off. They are guidelines against a force that doesn't operate on logic. You enforce them not to dominate, not to understand, but to coexist, just barely, for as long as you can. When the canyon reacts, it's not anger, it's correction. And correction can be subtle or total. I've carried the cost. Careers shifted. Partners vanished. Families strained. Sleep became fragmented. Authority fractured in my own hands. And yet, every time I close my eyes, every time I drive those roads, I feel its presence pressing at the edge of perception, watching, waiting, reminding me that it remembers. Not me personally, not individually, but the errors, the curiosities, the recognition that breaks boundaries. So, I say this for those who will hear it. Not because you asked, not because it can be fully understood, but because silence may no longer protect you. If you ever hear your name where no one should, if shadows move with purpose just beyond clarity, if distances warp under your feet, do not respond. Do not investigate. Do not doubt your instincts. Step back. Leave. Preserve yourself in the same way that the rules I learned protect those who come after. There is no final answer. There is no resolution. There is only the line drawn in the earth, in memory, in law unspoken. You can see it, sense it, acknowledge it, but you cannot own it, and you cannot survive it if you try. That is a lesson the land will enforce on its own timetable. I hope you never have to learn what I have learned firsthand. But if you do, remember, attention is engagement, recognition is responsibility, and curiosity has a cost far higher than you can calculate. Boundaries exist for a reason, and a canyon remembers all who cross them. Keep your distance. Observe if you must, and above all, listen to the silence when it presses too close. That is your only safeguard. And finally, if you ever hear your name where no one should, do not answer. Step back. Leave. Let the canyon reclaim what was disturbed. The cost of failing to obey is not something I can save you from. This is the warning I'm not supposed to give. And now that I have, it is yours to carry. Quietly, carefully, always. I used to believe that warnings were meant to be loud. Signs, barriers, red tape, sirens that told you where not to go. I know better now. The most dangerous boundaries are the ones that don't announce themselves at all. The ones that wait for curiosity to do the work for them. That canyon doesn't need fences. It doesn't need armed patrols or posted notices. It relies on something far older and far more reliable, human attention. The moment you notice it too closely, the moment you wonder why a trail bends where it shouldn't or why your GPS insists you stop moving when you're still walking, you've already stepped closer than you should have. That's how it starts. Not with terror, with small inconsistencies that invite explanation. I've watched people rationalize those moments. Officers, rangers, engineers, people trained to solve problems. They explain away the silence, the distortion, the way sound seems absorbed instead of echoed. They laugh it off later, over coffee, convinced nothing happened at all. Those are the ones I worry about most, because the land doesn't correct disbelief immediately. It waits. There were men better than me who thought they could measure it, map it, document it, reduce it to something manageable. They believed if you could name it, you could control it. That assumption is what put shovels in the ground in the first place. That assumption is why the dig order existed without explanation, and why the explanation never came afterward. The elders never tried to stop us directly. That's something I didn't understand until much later. They didn't argue. They didn't protest. They withdrew, and that withdrawal wasn't fear. It was respect for a boundary they knew we were about to violate. Silence, to them, wasn't ignorance. It was containment. We mistook that for superstition. If I could go back, that's the moment I would change. Not the dig, not the calls. The moment we dismissed quiet warnings because they weren't delivered in a language we respected. That's why I'm careful now. Why this warning isn't dramatic. Why I'm not telling you what it is or where it lies or how deep it goes. Because specifics invite testing, and testing invites attention. I don't know who will hear this. Maybe you're listening out of curiosity. Maybe you've had your own moment. Something unexplainable that hasn't left you. Something that still resurfaces when you're alone at night. If so, I want to understand this. Not everything unresolved is unfinished. Some things are complete the moment they are left alone. You don't need to go looking for proof. The land doesn't respond well to that. It responds to recognition, not confrontation. When it feels seen, acknowledged, named, that's when it reacts. Not violently. Precisely. I've stood at the edge of that precision. I've watched it correct mistakes without emotion, without anger. The way gravity corrects a misstep. The way depth corrects a fall. That's why the rules exist. Not because they stop it, but because they reduce the chances of you becoming part of the correction. And the hardest rule of all is this. Don't talk about it like it's a mystery waiting to be solved. Mysteries invite pursuit. This isn't a puzzle. It's a boundary. I live with that understanding now. It's shaped my silence, my distance from certain places, certain conversations. It's why I no longer argue when people dismiss what I refuse to explain. Let them. Disbelief is safer than curiosity. Sleep doesn't come easily anymore. When it does, it's light and fragile. I wake at small sounds, at imagined radio static, at the echo of my name spoken in a voice that almost sounds right. That's the part people don't understand. It doesn't sound monstrous. It sounds familiar. That's the danger. If it sounded wrong, you'd run. If it looked wrong, you'd turn away. But familiarity draws you closer. Familiarity is the hook. So if you take nothing else from this, take this one truth. The moment something feels almost normal but not quite, that's when you leave. Don't stay to confirm it. Don't stay to prove you're wrong. Survival doesn't require certainty. It requires restraint. I won't tell you what happened after the last report was filed. I won't tell you how many people quietly change apartments, change lives, change themselves to avoid crossing paths with that place again. I won't tell you what the land did when we thought it had been settled, because knowing isn't protection. Distance is. This warning isn't meant to frighten you. Fear fades. Curiosity doesn't. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to remember this feeling, this unease. If you ever find yourself somewhere quiet enough that your own thoughts feel too loud, if a road stretches longer than it should, if a canyon feels like it's listening instead of echoing, if you hear your name spoken gently, patiently, as if it's waiting for you to answer, don't. Step back. Leave. Carry the silence with you instead of the knowledge. That's how people survive places like that. Not by understanding them, but by respecting that some things were never meant to be understood at all. This is the warning I wasn't supposed to give. Now that you've heard it, the responsibility isn't mine alone anymore. Keep your distance. Keep your silence. And if you ever hear your name where no one should be, remember that recognition is an invitation, and not every invitation is meant to be accepted.